into this week's book club episode of Star Wars Aftermath Empire's End. If you are unfamiliar with the series, you can go ahead and click here and it'll take you back to the beginning. Basically, we've been going through Chuck Wendig's third Aftermath book, a couple of chapters at a time, breaking down the themes and events. And if you would rather, you could also click here and it'll take you back to the playlist for the first book in the trilogy, and you can join us from there. But with that, we are going to discuss an interlude today, along with chapters 32 and 33. We're getting real close to the end here, and boy, did some stuff happen in these chapters. Interlude 8 is set 25 years prior to the main events in this book, and it takes place on the the fancy ship that Palpatine's on. And we see Rax a little bit more grown up. This is Rax realizing that he's kind of come to the end of his duties. So his job was to be on Jakku and to keep the observatory safe as it was being built. Now the observatory has been built, so Rax is assuming, or he's Galley at this point in time, but Galley is assuming that his time under Palpatine's care and in Palpatine's service has come to an end, and will meet with a messy end. What's interesting, anytime I read about Galley, is he is an orphan from the sands of Jakku who grew up wanting some sort of purpose in life. And he's kind of this weird, dark reflection of Rey. In a lot of ways, he doesn't have force powers, as near as we can tell, but just that kind of similar upbringing. And it really makes me wonder what Jakku is as a planet. Is there some sort of significance to Rey? Does Palpatine have children stashed all over Jakku, and is there some significance there? Or is Jakku just the type of planet that would have a lot of these kind of lost orphans, where it's just kind of coincidental? And this is something I'm personally really excited to figure out in Rise of Skywalker. Easily could go either way, but it is something that often comes to mind as I read about the character of Galley. As to the story itself, Galley learns that Palpatine does not have it in his plans to kill him, but in fact has another stage where we start learning about this contingency, or more about this contingency that we've been hearing about in the books. Palpatine teaches him a game called Teza? I'm not sure how you would pronounce it. I often say with Star Wars, I know a lot, and I know how to pronounce absolutely none of it. It's basically space chess. It's like Dejeric, which again, I might be saying incorrectly. It's funny enough that chess is actually mentioned here, but it's a fancy way of doing things, and Palpatine is explaining that like every piece on the board has a specific purpose. There's a point to every move, every action, and you have to kind of take in this big game board way of seeing things, which in of itself has a meaning. Of course, Palpatine is explaining that he has a purpose for everything, including Galley. Then we kind of get to the meat and the beginning, finally, as we reach the end of the book, the beginnings of just what this contingency plan is all about. And it's not exactly what you may have thought. But Palpatine explains that you have the Imperialists, you have the Emperor, you have the main piece on the board that is to be protected at all costs when you play a game like this. And he explains that when that piece is taken out of play, that side loses. It doesn't matter how many pieces they have left on the board, the score doesn't matter. What matters is they lost their leader. Palpatine specifically says that if the Empire loses its Emperor, not only won't they survive, they don't deserve to. And this is where Palpatine mentions the contingency for the first time. Now, at this point, I will say that exactly what happens is going to get spelled out a little bit more clearly, so I won't say it now, though again, as I've said, if you've read Shattered Empire, if you've read Alphabet Squadron, if you've played Battlefront 2 or watched the cutscenes, you know what's happening. But for those who are just kind of experiencing through this book, go back to everything we've seen so far and all of the mysterious actions that Rax has taken that don't make a lot of sense, and think to yourself, not only shall the Empire not survive without the Emperor, but that it doesn't deserve to. And things will start to click into place. Of course, at the end of all this, hearing about the contingency, that's where Palpatine's like, have you ever heard of opera? Which is interesting, one, because it explains, as we already knew, Rax learns about opera from Palpatine, but it also makes me think back to the famous night opera scene with Anakin in Revenge of the Sith, and this seems to be a very normal thing that Palpatine likes to do that got passed down to Rax. Speaking of tutelage between mysterious figures and younger proteges, we're going to go into chapter 32, and this is an eerie scene. This is a scene that I remembered very well, even since, I haven't read this book since it was published, and this scene has not left me. And Rax walks into Armitage Hux. Armitage Hux is the Hux we see in the sequel trilogy, child to Brendel Hux. And Armitage is terrified. He's stuck in this cabin with all of the feral children that we've seen in the other chapters, and Rax comes in and is like, hey, what's going on, dude? Let me just rub some salt in your wound for, like, how bad your relationship is with your father. And really just kind of gets in Hux's head. Talks about how terrified Hux is of these children, to the point where, like, baby child Hux might want to, like, wet himself, is the words that are used in the book. And it's this very terrifying experience, to just imagine Hux, obviously a child in this scenario, but then the feral children themselves in this scenario. And it's just, like, it's just kids wanting to eat each other, basically. And it brings back the line of the Empire needs children. And because I'm me, if you don't already know, I have a huge obsession with the video game franchise of BioShock. BioShock 1, 2, and Infinite. And it immediately made me think of the little sisters from the BioShock series. And there's even a line in the Burial at Sea added stories to BioShock Infinite. This is Rapture is a city that values children, not childhood, that they need children. And this has nothing to do with Star Wars, but it's immediately where my head went. Just this idea of you need children, but not because you value children or the inherent goodness or purity of children. You need children because you have a purpose for them, and this really nasty, nasty purpose for them, just robbing them of any kind of innocence that they may have had, and in that one time where we all kind of get to be innocent. And this whole time, Armitage Hux is a very sympathetic character. I mean, he's being described as not loved by his father, not appreciated by his father. He's alone on this ship, and there's this dark, shadowy figure of Rax, that's kind of counseling him at this point, and he's around these children that have been turned into monsters, and you want to feel for him. And then Rax is like, these children are yours, you're going to lead these children, you are going to bend them to your will. And Rax leaves, and Hux's first impulse to, like, get over his fear is to cause one of the feral children to punch another feral child in the head, to the point where he's bleeding. And the kids are just totally fine with it. Like, the kids have accepted that Hux is their leader. And it's horrifying, because, like, the one person in this entire scene that I really wanted to feel bad for was Hux. Like, as much as I want to feel bad for all these other feral kids, I read a chapter where they just, like, eviscerated half a Star Destroyer, it seemed like. And I do feel bad for them, but, like, Hux was, like, the still kind of adjusted one, and then to see him be that sadistic. And of course, he's being that sadistic to protect himself, but he's also being that sadistic because he kind of likes it a little bit, which is the Hux that we see in the sequel trilogy. And it was a scene that really played with my head, but it was really, really well written. And it does a lot to show what the Empire's up to show the depths that Rax will go to, but also to give us some really fascinating backstory on Hux in the sequel trilogy. And reading this again, it made me realize, like, how much more I want to see out of Hux, because he's a guy who, I mean, he's serving under Snoke, and he's, he has to listen to Kylo Ren, and he's seeing these guys, and he's already been at the Battle of Jakku and served under Rax and been a part of the Imperial contingency. I mean, there's nobody in the First Order that we've seen so far in the two movies that have the kind of history that he does, except for maybe Snoke. I don't know, it was really interesting to revisit that and to see how much of a history with all of the stuff that Hux has as a character. And then for those of you who read Phasma, what happens there. I'm not going to spoil it, because I don't know if you've all have read Phasma, and Phasma's on my list of other books we might do as a book club someday, so I'm not going to talk about it right now. But as powerful as the Interlude was, and as powerful as Chapter 32 was, Chapter 33 might be one of the best chapters I have read in a new canon novel. Empire's End is up there in one of my favorite new canon books, but there are several that have kind of inched their way in front of it, not because there's anything wrong with Empire's End, but a testament to the quality that the new canon has had. But this chapter was spectacular, and there's so much going on In this chapter, I'm going to try to just get through it without jumping around too much or taking too long on it, but it was a hefty one. If you were reading it, it took us like 20 pages. It's like a 3-act almost kind of chapter, but we start with Sloane. Really, this is the tale of the Revenger. This whole chapter is the tale of the Revenger, and we are going to see the tale of the Revenger through the eyes of several characters. And we start, of course, with Sloane. The Revenger was Sloane's ship in Aftermath Prime. It was her pride and joy, and then Rax kind of came on the scene and outranked her, which was always a thing. In a way, took her ship from her, certainly after the events of Life Debt. And the attack on Chandrilla when Sloane was missing and did not go back. She lost the Revenger, and she's been thinking about it this whole book. And she kind of looks up, and she daydreams about taking Nora out, escaping and getting on the Revenger and flying away and starting her new empire. And she knows it's too little too late, and it's never going to happen. So she, for the last time, gives up on the Revenger. And it's this moment where she's just like, nope, I'm committed. This is the path I'm going on. So this is where we start. We start with boots on the ground, looking up at the Revenger in the sky from the eyes of the woman who knows that ship best. And then we carry on, and then we see the Revenger through the eyes of Admiral Akbar. And Akbar is viewing the war, viewing everything that's going on in this battle, thinking of battles past. Unrelated to the Revenger, just kind of a cool shout out. There is a reference here to a ship called the Ghost Finder fleet. You may remember in Life Debt, I said there was an Easter egg for another author by the name of Adam Christopher, who wrote the Rey Electromatic books. In Star Wars, he's written End of Watch from a certain point of view, and it's just announced he's going to be writing a comic for an upcoming issue of Star Wars Adventures. But he's buddies with Chuck Wendig, and he got another shout out in this book. Ghostfinder is also Adam Christopher's Twitter handle, @Ghostfinder, which you should totally follow, by the way. And I point that out because Adam Christopher is a good friend of the site, and he's been a good supporter for a while. But it was just kind of cool to find him. He's very proud of his 2 cameos in the series. Easter eggs aside, getting back into the story, Akbar is watching, and he realizes that the Empire is not fighting like the Empire, right? The whole point of Rax bringing everybody to Jakku was to harden them and make them feral. I mean, he's basically turned everybody feral. And Akbar is witnessing this, and he's not sure what to do about it. And as he's considering this, he sees a Star Destroyer just basically like pull out of formation and attack one of the 3 specific classes of ships that are just doing a whole bunch of damage in the space battlefield. It seems like a suicide run. It crashes into ship number 1. Ship number 1 spreads into debris, and the debris crashes into the ship that is being commanded by Krista Agate. And here is where everything just goes crazy. So Akbar calls over to Agate, and Agate is sending all of her people to the escape pods. In space, the rebels, the New Republic were not able to get as much ground as they wanted. The Empire was holding them back very, very toughly. I don't think that's a word, but they were holding them back. And Agate's been trying to push through with her fancy class of ships, and this suicide run by the Star Destroyer basically takes out their best weapons against the Empire. And Krista Agate does not want to step down because the Revenger, the Super Star Destroyer, is still out there. Like, it's still causing problems. She tries to just throw every weapon she has at the Revenger because she assumes she'll go down with her ship. You know, she is her rank isn't captain, but she's the captain of the ship. The captain goes down with the ship. Akbar is trying to convince her to not do this. So she comes up with this wild plan. She talks to Akbar, and Akbar is like, you gotta get out of there. And she's like, no, just trust me, shoot the engines. And she hangs up on him, basically. And so Akbar just does it. And then she uses the super incredible tractor beam to pull the Revenger out of the sky. And as her ship crashes, she takes the entire Super Star Destroyer with her. And it was an absolutely stunning couple of pages. Heartbroken. I actually forgot that Agate died in this book until I got to that chapter and went, oh, now I remember what's about to happen. And so I kind of got to relive this again. And it was stunning. It was absolutely amazing. And again, we've gone from seeing the Revenger as the source of freedom for Sloane up into the sky, to being in the middle of this mad fight, to now the Ravagers falling. For a brief time, we saw Rand and his perspective on the Star Destroyer. We learned that the smaller Star Destroyer, the regular-sized one that kind of went on the suicide run, did so because the guy on it, the guy at the helm, just snapped. That he was one of the ones that didn't work in the great Jakku culling, and they didn't figure that out until they got to space. Otherwise, the Empire never would have done that tactic. If they never would have done that tactic, Agate never would have done hers, and in all likelihood, the Empire would have eventually won in space, just because time was on their side. But instead, they lost the Ravager. And so now, when you watch The Force Awakens and you see the remnants of the Superstar Destroyer in The Force Awakens, that's the Ravager that we've spent so much time on, and that's one of the ships that Rey is crawling around when we first meet her in The Force Awakens. As another kind of aside, at some point in the story it mentions Blade Squadron. Blade Squadron, conveniently enough, if you have the paperback edition of the book, has a short story. I believe there was one in Life Debt as well. Yep, back of Life Debt, there's a short story about Blade Squadron on Kuat, and this one has Blade Squadron on Jakku. I've not read those yet, but I will probably be diving into those once I finish the Aftermath books. But I presume it's just a different perspective of the events we have seen in the books thus far. But as I said, this series of chapters follows what we know of the Ravager, and so now the Ravager is crashing, and now we're going to see the perspective of it coming to the service of Jakku, and now we see it from the perspective of Timon. Timon is flying around doing Phantom Squadron things, trying to shoot down some stuff, and instead gets hit by some of the debris from either Agate's ship or the Ravager. He crash lands, and he's like, holy crap, like describes as if it became night, like the Ravager was blocking out so much of the sky. Then we hop over to Nora and Sloane, in which case Bones is like, hey, Timon's out there, I gotta go. Nora lets him go. This was kind of an interesting bit because this is when Sloane sees the Ravager falling, and we don't get to go back into Sloane's head. We stay in Nora's, which is understandable. We haven't been in Nora's head for this chapter. In that part I didn't mind. I was a little sad that we didn't get to see any of this from Sloane's perspective. We get to hear what Sloane says, but we don't get to hear what she thinks in this specific chapter. I am quite certain we will in chapters to come, but I was a little bit let down that in that moment I didn't get to know what Sloane was thinking. Then we get back to Timon. Timon is now surrounded by some of these feral stormtroopers and is saved by Mr. Bones. Mr. Bones comes in, takes out a bunch of the troopers. He starts getting shot at by a chicken walker, an ATST. Timon's trying to help best he can, but at the end of the day, Bones is the victor. He's taken out everyone until this part I definitely remembered. An A-Wing flies by trying to help, shoots the chicken walker, and rest in peace, Mr. Bones. And this is very different than the state we found him in earlier. Earlier in the book, he has already reassembled himself once, but of course he was just merely disassembled. He's been melted to slag. This is the end of Mr. Bones, which was very sad for me. Unfortunately, with so many droid companions, they don't make it, right? Like K2SO doesn't make it, L3 doesn't make it, and Timon is understandably wrecked, and this is the point where things are going to start happening. We've hit the end of the book, fates are going to be sealed. This is the point where you should start worrying. But like I said, this whole chapter was incredible. You could almost read this chapter as like a short story in of itself with a beginning, middle, and end. Seeing the Ravager in the sky, seeing the Ravager get attacking and then get attacked, and then seeing the Ravager fall like a meteor shower to Jakku's surface, and its explosion gets described, and all of that was so well done and so poignant, and it becomes the turning point for the rest of the story. And the frustrating part is it's this amazing rebel victory, or was it a part of the contingency? What we're cheering for and what we're rooting for at this point has become massively complicated due to the interlude that we read at the beginning of this week's chapters. But with that, that's what we're going to discuss this week. Please leave me a comment on what you thought. I'm sure there's a lot to discuss. For next week, we're going to do something a little shorter. We're going to do chapter 34 and the Interlude. The Interlude being Liberty's Misrule, which will take us back to the pirate Elodie, I believe, that we met earlier in the stories. At this point, I don't know if I made a promise for how long it's going to be last week. If I did, I'm going to contradict myself this week. We're going to have 3 more weeks. So we're going to read 34 in the Interlude this week, 35, 36, 37 next week, and then 38 and the epilogue the week after. So we are nearly done. We will be done sometime in the month of August. I will say today, if I've checked my calendar correct, is a big thing because approximately a year ago, the first Aftermath video was published. So for those of you who have been with me for a whole Griffin year, thank you, because I had no idea anybody would stick with the series this long or would want to keep reading with me this long, and I had no idea we were going to spend this much time on a single book trilogy. As much as I love these Aftermath characters, a year is a long time to spend with someone. So it's going to be bittersweet when we finish this in just a few weeks, but man, it's been a year, guys, so thank you so much. If you're not already, please follow us on the various socials, and I will talk to you guys next week.